Lesson 2: Everyday Psychology and Scientific Psychology. Every human being carries a certain kind of knowledge about other people. Long before anyone encounters the word psychology, they are already able to interpret behavior, anticipate reactions, and make sense of emotions. We know when someone is irritated, tired, disappointed, or excited. We recognize tension in a voice, sadness in a facial expression, aggression in movement. This ability is not extraordinary. It is a basic condition of social life. Without it, everyday interaction would be impossible. In this sense, everyday psychology is something natural. It is a collection of intuitions, beliefs, and experiences that each person accumulates over a lifetime. It is shaped by observation, conversation, personal experience, and cultural narratives. When people say, "I know this type of person," or "I can already tell how this will end," they are drawing on this everyday psychological knowledge. And very often, it works. It allows us to orient ourselves quickly, respond without prolonged reflection, and make immediate decisions in real time. The problem does not lie in the existence of everyday psychology itself. The problem begins when this form of knowledge is treated as certain, complete, and final. When intuition stops being a starting point and becomes an unquestionable explanation. Scientific psychology did not emerge to deny everyday thinking, but to reveal its limits. To show that what seems obvious is often far from accurate. One of the defining features of everyday psychological thinking is selectivity. We notice what confirms our existing beliefs and overlook what contradicts them. If we believe that someone is irresponsible, we will easily remember situations in which they were late or failed to meet expectations. At the same time, we will struggle to notice moments in which the same person acted reliably or responsibly. This mechanism operates automatically and affects everyone. It is not a flaw of individual character, but a feature of human cognition. Scientific psychology begins precisely where there is an attempt to move beyond this selectivity. It introduces procedures that force us to ask whether what we notice is representative, whether what we remember is complete, and whether alternative explanations might exist. Instead of relying solely on what stands out emotionally or personally, it seeks patterns that remain stable across situations and observers. Another characteristic of everyday thinking about human behavior is the tendency toward simplification. We are drawn to clear categories. Someone is good or bad, strong or weak, confident or insecure. These labels create a sense of order and predictability, but they also distort reality. In practice, most human traits and behaviors are situational rather than fixed. The same person may appear decisive in one context and hesitant in another, calm at work and impulsive in intimate relationships. Everyday psychology often treats these inconsistencies as contradictions or flaws. Scientific psychology treats them as data. From a scientific perspective, variability is not an error that needs to be eliminated. It is a phenomenon that requires explanation. Instead of asking why someone is inconsistent, psychology asks under what conditions certain behaviors emerge and why those conditions matter. This shift represents a profound change in how human behavior is understood. A further feature of everyday psychology is its close connection to moral judgment. When we attempt to explain someone's behavior, we quickly move toward evaluation. Someone should have acted differently. They could have anticipated the consequences. They should not have reacted in that way. Explanation and judgment become intertwined, often without conscious awareness. Scientific psychology attempts to separate these two domains, not because moral evaluation is irrelevant, but because mixing explanation with judgment makes understanding more difficult. Scientific psychology adopts a different cognitive stance. Instead of asking who is right or wrong, it asks which factors might have contributed to a given behavior. Instead of assuming that behavior is a direct reflection of personality, it considers context, personal history, situational pressures, and internal psychological processes. This is not a matter of terminology, but of orientation. It changes what we pay attention to and how we interpret what we see. It is important to state clearly that scientific psychology is not free from error. It does not offer absolute truths or final answers. What distinguishes it from everyday psychology is not certainty, but method. Its conclusions are based on systematic observation, clearly defined procedures, and critical analysis of results. This means that its claims can be tested, questioned, and revised. This openness to correction is one of its greatest strengths. The difference between everyday and scientific psychology does not lie in the idea that one knows and the other does not. It lies in how conclusions are reached and how willing we are to doubt them. Scientific psychology requires an acceptance of uncertainty. It requires acknowledging that first impressions may be misleading and that simple explanations may be insufficient. This difference has significant practical consequences. When everyday psychology dominates our understanding of others, stereotypes, simplifications, and unfair judgments become more likely. When a scientific perspective is introduced, the possibility of more accurate decisions increases. In education, in professional settings, in relationships, and in social policy, this shift in perspective can fundamentally change outcomes. Scientific psychology does not replace experience. It subjects experience to reflection. At this stage, there is no need to understand research methods or statistical tools. Those will come later. For now, one fundamental distinction is sufficient. Everyday psychology answers questions quickly and intuitively. Scientific psychology responds more slowly, more cautiously, and with greater awareness of its own limitations. This slower pace is not a disadvantage. It is the cost of greater reliability. If one idea is meant to remain after this lesson, it is this: experience alone is not enough to understand human behavior. The more confident we are in our interpretations, the greater our need for cognitive caution. Psychology as a science begins at the moment when we choose not to trust the first impression, but to examine it. To understand why this distinction matters so deeply, it is worth slowing down and examining the cognitive costs of relying exclusively on intuition. Everyday psychological thinking feels efficient because it is fast. It provides immediate explanations and a sense of understanding. But this speed comes at a price. The faster an interpretation forms, the less room there is for doubt, revision, or alternative explanations. One of the most significant consequences of intuitive thinking is cognitive overconfidence. When we feel certain that we know why someone behaved in a particular way, curiosity disappears. Questions stop forming. The situation feels closed. This sense of closure is psychologically comforting, but it prevents deeper understanding. Scientific psychology begins at the moment when this closure is suspended. Another consequence of intuitive explanations is the tendency to confuse explanation with justification or blame. When behavior is interpreted quickly and without context, responsibility is often assigned prematurely. Situational pressures, emotional states, prior experiences, and unseen constraints fade into the background. Scientific psychology does not deny responsibility, but it resists collapsing explanation into moral verdict. It insists on understanding before evaluation. This distinction becomes particularly important when we consider how judgments shape action. In education, work, and personal relationships, intuitive interpretations can harden into fixed expectations and enduring narratives. Scientific psychology introduces a pause. It asks whether behavior is stable across contexts, whether alternative interpretations exist, and whether unseen variables may be at work. A further limitation of everyday psychology lies in its relationship with memory. Human memory is reconstructive, selective, and influenced by emotion. Events that confirm beliefs are remembered more vividly, while those that challenge assumptions are often forgotten or reinterpreted. Scientific psychology treats memory as data that require verification rather than as definitive evidence. This is why scientific psychology relies on structured observation rather than isolated anecdotes. A single experience cannot establish a general principle. Repetition, comparison, and systematic variation are required. This approach constrains subjectivity and reduces the influence of personal bias. Another crucial difference lies in prediction. Everyday psychology often assumes that understanding behavior means being able to predict it reliably. Scientific psychology adopts a more modest stance. It recognizes that prediction is probabilistic rather than deterministic. Understanding increases likelihood, but never guarantees certainty. Scientific psychology does not eliminate intuition. Intuition remains a valuable starting point. What changes is its status. It becomes something to be examined rather than trusted automatically. At this stage of the course, there is no expectation that you abandon intuitive understanding. The goal is to become aware of its limits and to notice when certainty arrives too quickly. This awareness is the foundation of psychological thinking. The difference between everyday and scientific psychology is not merely academic. It is a difference in posture toward human behavior. Everyday psychology seeks immediate meaning. Scientific psychology accepts delayed understanding. Everyday psychology reassures. Scientific psychology unsettles. This unsettling quality reflects intellectual responsibility. When dealing with human behavior, the cost of error is high. Scientific psychology introduces caution where intuition rushes ahead. It reminds us that understanding is a process, not an achievement. As the course progresses, you will encounter multiple psychological approaches and theories. Their diversity is not a failure, but a response to human complexity. Psychology does not aim for a single final explanation. It aims for increasingly refined perspectives. For now, the distinction remains simple. Everyday psychology allows us to function. Scientific psychology allows us to reflect. One operates through immediacy, the other through restraint. Psychology as a science begins at the moment when we choose openness over certainty. In the next lessons, we will turn to the historical emergence of psychology as a scientific discipline and examine why different schools of thought developed. This diversity will make sense only if the distinction explored here is kept firmly in mind. Without it, psychology appears fragmented. With it, psychology reveals itself as a disciplined response to human complexity.